Hello, welcome to yet another video on Python. And this video is about functions in Python. This is Manu from Climatic Data Labs, and I'm going to take you forward in this video. Function is something like a mathematical function, if you have read about it, which we denoted like fx is equal to x plus something. Let's say this is one function which takes a variable x and then adds 2 to it, right? So this is a typical function as we have in mathematics. And I'll take an example of a process of making a cup of tea, right? So everybody has tried a cup of tea sometime in their life. So I think it's an easy example. So what you need to make a cup of tea, you need some ingredients, right? You need some ingredients, and then you need uh, a recipe, right? Now, you in this way of making a tea, you can pass your preference, right? Some preferences of making the tea into this function, which already has ingredients and recipe. So the preference becomes your input parameter or input parameters. And then once you pass it to the function is called using the function call, right? And in this function call, we pass the preferences as parameters, and then you get an output, which is a cup of tea. So this is the entire process of making a cup of tea, and we have used it to relate it to a function. Now this overall environment, this overall scheme of things, which is enclosed in this blue box, right? And then there is this green box, right? So what is inside this green box is the local environment or the local variable, and whatever is outside it is the global environment, or whatever is inside it are global variables, right? So for example, the input parameters are now global variables, which these are available anywhere inside this in this blue box, including this function, which is also inside this blue box. But the local variables like ingredients and recipe are not available outside this green box in this area, right? So this is the concept of local and global variables. So this function is returning or giving as an output a cup of tea, right? Now the preferences can be like you want to have no sugar in the tea, no milk, or normal tea. So maybe this first one is one way of making the tea. So maybe while calling this function, you pass it with this variable only. Next time with this variable. It's like so on and so forth. So what's happening here is for each specific individual preference, you have this thing fixed. You just pass this preference, you get a cup of tea accordingly. You pass this preference, you get another kind of tea, right? So you don't have to recreate this process again and again for each step, and that's the beauty of functions. You don't have to repeat the process. It module gives you a structure to the overall problem statement, and also it avoids repetitions, right? So you don't have to repeat the process again and again. You define it once and it will be taken up next time automatically based on a fixed structure. Now we saw this example where we had the function and we passed the input parameters and we got the t, right? But this time, so we saw the function like in the last slide, and we did all these things by passing input parameters to function calls, and we got a cup of tea as a return or as an output. The function was returning a cup of tea, as we call it. Now, sometimes the function does not return something. For instance, in this case, the cup of tea is inside this function, right? It is not giving it outside the function. It's not throwing the output outside the function. So the output is nothing. The function does not return anything in this case, which means this is a function without returning anything. Whatever it is creating, it is consuming inside the function itself. And same logic for the local and the global variables. So there are two types of functions. One is the built-in function. These are like whatever functions you use in Python, the predefined ones, like for example, the len function, the absolute function, or the function like finding the minimum, maximum, or sum of values. Then there is user defined function, and as the name suggests, the user defines this function. You can define a function in this method. We'll come to this pretty soon and cover how we create this function. And this session is more about the user defined functions. So to summarize the theory part of it, Python function are block of statements to execute a specific task, and these gets executed only when called, only by a call. So if you have a function written in a code, it will not run until and unless called. They are just sitting there in the code block, but they will never run until and unless called. Uh, the function accepts input in the form of arguments or parameters. A function may or may not return something, as we already discussed. It's useful in structuring the code in blocks and modules, and it makes the code or chunks of code reusable. So how do you create a function and how do you call it? So creating and calling a user-defined function. User-defined function is, like we said, the function that we define and not the inbuilt ones. So we define or create a Python function by using the def or def keyword, right? And calling a function in Python is done through by just using the name of the function, right? So call a defined function by the name. So this is a quick example. Here I am saying def my function brackets arguments colon. So this is the function definition. Then you might have some body of the function where you do something, and then you might have a return keyword. Return may, so a function may or may not return something, which means this may or may not be included in a function depending on the use case. And if you have to call this function to do whatever this function does, you have to call this function by its name. Its name is my underscore function. So you say my underscore function, and then you can pass the arguments or parameters through it, which is accepted here. So these arguments are accepted here. How you define, how you put these arguments here, and how they're put here, that needs another discussion on how you calling the function. But in short, whatever arguments you pass from here are accepted here, and this is your function call. About the local and global variables. So local variables and global variables we have already discussed theoretically. Local variables are defined inside function. Global variables are defined outside the function. And as the name suggests, local variables have local scope, that is, they can be accessed only within the function, whereas global variables can be accessed throughout the program, anywhere, including inside the function as well. So like in this case, I'm defining this variable outside the function, so this becomes a global variable, whereas this becomes a local variable because this is defined inside the function. So this is the area where local variables are accessible, and this is the area where global variables are accessible. So let's quickly discuss a small function in Python. There could be n number of functions, small functions, complex functions, nested functions, very complicated functions, functions to call another function, and as a matter of fact, all the libraries that you have, all the inbuilt code, they also are function, and they would also have been defined something similar to this with few more things added to them. So in this example, we're going to create a function that adds two numbers that are passed to it, right? So let's first talk about these two numbers, x1 and x2. So these are the global variables because they're defined outside the function body. This is the function body. Here we are defining the function, and this is the body of the function, and it's returning y. And then over here, I'm calling the function because I'm writing the name of the function here and passing two parameters here, right? So let's run this step by step. So over here, I'm defining two global variables. So if I run this, it accepts two variables, x1 and x2 with values 2 and 3. And then And then over here I'm defining the function. If you run this code, this will never be executed until and unless this is called, right? So so the call is here, right? So I have to first run this, right? And then if I run this, the function gets executed and it takes x1 and x2 in the call, which is 2 and 3, and it passes to this function over here. Now x1 corresponds to a, x2 corresponds to b. How you call the function, we will discuss that in a more extended version of functions topic, but to keep it simple, just think of it that x1 is passed to and x2 is passed to b. So a becomes 2 and b becomes 3. Y is equal to a plus 2 into b. A plus, I need to correct this because we're just adding two numbers. So y is equal to a plus b. These are the local variables because these are inside the function. A and b are the local variables. And then return y. So the sum which is here is returned here. So you get output as y. So wherever we call the function, and in this call, I'm assigning this call to z, right? So which means whatever is returned from here, which is y, is passed to z. So, so if I print z here, I get the output as 5. So uh, this is how the function works. Few points to note: if I print a here, which we have commented out, so a is inside this, so it will throw an error, right? Because a is a local variable. So if I try to run this, it says undefined name a because it does not recognize a being a local variable. However, if a was defined outside here, then this would become a global variable and the error will go and you can still then print this value here. So this brings us to the end of with few more videos on Python. Thanks. This is Manu.